Protecting pornography means protecting sexual abuse as speech. In this episode of Philosophers Explained by me, Stephen Hicks, we turn to Catharine MacKinnon's 1993 Only Words, published by Harvard University Press, in which Professor MacKinnon uses a combination of egalitarian, social constructionist, and postmodern strategies to argue against both the traditional conservative and modern liberal understandings of pornography. Let's go to the text. Only Words, originally a 3-lecture series delivered at Harvard University and then published subsequently as a book by Harvard University Press in 1993. The text. Imagine that for hundreds of years, your most formative traumas, your daily suffering and pain, the abuse you live through, the terror you live with are unspeakable, not the basis of literature. You grow up with your father holding you down and covering your mouth so another man can make a horrible, searing pain between your legs. When you are older, your husband ties you to the bed and drips hot wax on your nipples and brings in other men to watch and makes you smile through it. Your doctor will not give you drugs he has addicted you to unless you suck his penis. You cannot tell anyone. All right, terrible to imagine. A couple of points in the opening about the content and the rhetorical form in which that content is made. You'll notice I've highlighted the word your, you several times through, and this is the second person that MacKinnon is adopting. Who is the you who is experiencing this and through this? It can't be individual women, focused on them as individuals, because it's for hundreds of years and individuals don't live through that amount of time. So we have a suggestion here that this is the general or the collective experience of woman. And so it's a less of an individual focused or a statistical analysis. It's a general statement or about the collective experience of women throughout history. Another important issue here is the individuals she chooses to highlight as the abusers in this case. We might think, well, of course, there are sexual abusers out there, child molesters, rapists, and so forth, but they are a minority of men, or they are just weirdos. And by and large, women know the protection of their fathers, the love of their husbands, the care of their physicians. And so, by and large, the relationships between men and women are positive and mutually beneficial. But clearly what MacKinnon wants to suggest is that that is not true. It's the fathers who are doing the abusing. It's the husbands who are doing the abusing. It's the doctors, people whom we might ordinarily think would be above that terrible beastly behavior, but they are the very ones subjecting women in their care to these treatments. So that's to highlight two important points right off the bat about this dark beginning. In this 1,000 years of silence, again emphasizing the general experience of women here, along comes a technological invention. The camera is invented and pictures are made of you while these things are being done. And then, suddenly, slowly, it dawns on you, maybe now I will be believed. You find a guarded way of bringing it up. Maybe the pictures are even evidence of rape. All right, pausing here, there's been, of course, a standard problem of what goes on inside the privacy of a home or the privacy of a doctor's office, a reticence on the part of the authorities to invade the privacy, certain amount of, well, these are run by the father or run by the husband anyway, so we don't want to usurp his authority, legal issues about evidence, he said, she said, how do we tell who's telling the truth and who's really lying, and so forth. So maybe modern technology, the camera, then can come to the aid of the women who are subject to these chronically abusive experiences. Maybe the pictures are even evidence of rape. Those who use you through the pictures feel their own pleasure. They do not feel your pain. So when you present this even as evidence, they interpret it from their subjective perspective. They don't see it as a pain trauma, particularly if they are males. They will experience from the traditional male perspective and not even see them as negative evidence. They won't see what you do. And on top of that, there is a social problem. The pictures surrounded by a special halo of false secrecy and false taboo. False because they really are public and not really against the rules. So it's a suggestion here that there's a hypocrisy that has run through society's attitudes toward rape, molestation, and so forth, that, oh no, those are just really bad things, but really we want those, especially we if we are male. So we pretend to be opposed to them, but secretly we desire them and have no desire for them really to go away. The literature of your experience, a sign for sex, sex itself. In a very real way, they have made sex be what it is to the people who use you and the pictures of you interchangeably. Now, there's an interesting then metaphysical point being suggested here. We might say there's a distinction between the representational realm, words, pictures, and so forth, and what goes on in reality. And first, the suggestion here that we need to, or we will be blurring that distinction or arguing that that's a distinction without a difference. In a very real way, the pictures are what they are, right? Actual sexual abuse, not merely representations of sexual abuse. Again, a reiteration of the fathers, the husbands, and the doctors who are involved. This is people with whom we would expect girls and women to have intimate, protective relationships. They are abusers also. Their fathers, husbands, and doctors saw the pictures, liked them, and did the same things to them, things they had never done or said they wanted before. All right, pausing here, a suggestion that it's not in the nature, so to speak, of men, fathers, husbands, doctors, or random guys on the street to want to do terrible things. It's they see the pornography, and then the pornography leads them to want them to do those things. So the first suggestion here of a kind of social construction or social conditioning, that the being of humans is more malleable and created by the stimuli from the environment that it is subjected to. And then on the basis of this new invention and the social sanction behind it applied to sexuality, there's a whole pornography industry that then grows up. There is, you find, a whole industry in buying and selling captive, smiling women to make such pictures, acting as if they like it. Okay, now you, right, this is the second person. Suppose you are sensing that you are a victim here and you want to do something about it, and you see now that you have the evidence, this pornography, that you can present hopefully to the authorities as evidence of the abuse that is done to you. What is the response that you get? Well, it's something like this. Even if something wrong was done to you, how metaphysically obtuse can you be? The pictures themselves do nothing. They are an expression of ideas, a discussion, a debate, a discourse. How repressed and repressive can you be? They are constitutionally protected speech. So the distinction between sexual abuse and representations of sexual abuse, or the distinction between actual sexuality, even simulated sexuality that is recorded, and the recording of that sexuality. The one side is speech, constitutionally protected. Meanwhile, of course, the actual abuse or rape would be not protected. So there's a fundamental distinction between deeds and representations, or acts and speech. And that's the response, the standard response against the women who want to use pornography as evidence of their abuse. So when you are then subjected to this, you hear this from all sides. Nobody will believe you. No one will accept this as evidence. Your reality and your sense of reality starts to go awry. Soon, your own experience is not real to you anymore, like a movie you watch but cannot stop. This is the woman's version of life imitating art, your life as the pornographer's text. So in that state of cognitive and emotional dissonance between what you know to be real and what everybody around you is telling you your reality really is, you then have to adopt certain psychological mechanisms in order to get by. To survive, you learn shame and how to cover it with sexual bravado, inefficacy, and how to make it seductive, secrecy, and the habit of not telling what you know until you forget it. You learn how to leave your body and create someone else who takes over when you cannot stand it anymore. You develop a self who is ingratiating and obsequious and imitative and aggressively passive and silent. You learn, in a word, femininity. So the idea here is then that there's not like a real femininity and a real masculinity, particularly not as it is in the modern world, pornography, sexualized society such as we live in. There has been a conception of femininity that has come into existence. It's one that men like, and because of their power, they are then able to gaslight or psychologically manipulate women into thinking that's what their real femininity is or should be. And so the women then are conditioned and they themselves become complicit in constructing this false version of femininity and coming to believe it or almost believe it, perhaps. Before the invention of the camera, right, the question of the legal regulation of pornography was framed as a question of the freedom of expression. So the camera came in the 1800s, moving pictures in the 1900s. Prior to then, though, the vocabulary of free speech and censorship had already been established in those earlier technological times. It was framed as the question of freedom of expression of the pornographers and their consumers. The government's interest in censoring the expression of ideas about sex was opposed to the publisher's right to express them and readers' right to read and think about them. And she goes on to argue, prior to the invention of the camera and the modern technologies that have flowed from that, there was some basis in reality for this division of sides. Under the law of obscenity, governments did try to suppress art and literature because it was sexual in content. But the technology has been a game changer, and the new kind of society that has been created is different. In this new context, the expressive issues raised by pornography also change or should. In the new context, protecting pornography means protecting sexual abuse as speech, at the same time that both pornography and its protection have deprived women of speech, especially speech against sexual abuse. So the act of creating the pornography, the industry that lures women into it and subjects them to it, the society that has constructed women to think that they want to be a part of this industry. There is abuse there. The pornography, as it is recorded in the cameras, is not a separate representation. It is implicitly built into and complicit in constructing that social reality. And then at the same time, it silences women. So there's a double problem here. So what we should be doing in the new context, MacKinnon argues, is something like this: changing our definition of what pornography is. The operative definition of censorship accordingly shifts from government silencing what powerless people say to powerful people violating powerless people into silence and hiding behind state power to do it. So the men who are the consumers of the pornography, the men primarily who are the producers of the pornography, they are the powerful ones in society. Women are the relatively powerless ones. They are the ones who are victimized. When the pornography is created, that is the abuse. And then what we now have is state power being used to protect the powerful abusers. So that's the new reality that a good definition now will reflect. In the United States, pornography is protected by the state. And then MacKinnon goes on to argue that there is, of course, a diversity of political opinion in the United States, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, and so on. But she goes on to point out that every major branch of American political philosophy agrees on this point, that pornography should be protected as a freedom of expression and a freedom of consumption. So she goes on to argue here. This posture, right, this posture of that we're protecting free speech and protecting freedom of consumption against government abuses, this posture unites pornography's apologists. From libertarian economist and Judge Frank Easterbrook to liberal philosopher King Ronald Dworkin, from conservative scholar and judge Richard Posner to the pornographer's lawyer Edward D. Grazia. So they are all men, and despite their superficial differences as libertarian, liberal, and conservative, underneath the surface they share a common philosophy, one that from MacKinnon's perspective is sanctioning the abuse of women, the recording of that abuse and the dissemination of that in the furtherance of then constructing society and maintaining society's current construction. In their approach taken together, pornography falls presumptively into the legal category speech. Right? And then they go on to argue fundamentally, in this view, a form of communication cannot as such do anything bad except offend. An offense is all in the head, right? It's subjective, it's in virtual representations, it's in our imaginations, it's in our ideas, but it's not in reality. And then a whole legal apparatus built up around that the First Amendment protects this. But on the other side of the argument now, we have this argument that the distinction between reality and representation, or between actions and speech, between what's out there objectively and what's in here subjectively, that distinction is metaphysically fraught. That needs to be broken down. And so there's an argument that MacKinnon goes on to develop here about what are called in philosophy performatives. That is to say, words that are in the act of expressing them also actions or deeds. Right? So sometimes, of course, we have words and we're just entertaining them in our heads, and we don't mean to operate on the basis of them, or we're not making an actual existential or action commitment to those. And of course, then there are actions that are out there that could be later verbalized and recordings made in memory or in text for mental contemplation. But there's this third category of things that is neither just an act nor just speech, but rather a speech that is at the same time an action and a performative. Social life is full of words that are legally treated as the acts they constitute. And then we have some interesting examples here. Saying kill to a trained attack dog is only words, right? Yet it is not seen as expressing the viewpoint, I want you dead, which is usually does in fact express. So in that case, if you have a trained attack dog, a kind of a biological weapon there, the word, right, kill in that context is not just an idea, because that word activates something real that has a destructive effect. It is a performance. And so the person who says kill to the attack dog is seen as complicit in the resulting damage that is done by the dog. It's all part of a causal process that is integrated. It is seen as performing an act tantamount to someone's destruction, like saying, ready, aim, fire, to a firing squad. Right? So the captain of the firing squad who says fire cannot afterwards say, well, don't look at me. I didn't shoot the gun. All I did was say a word. It was just a word. It was just a representation. No, that word was a performative in that context. It becomes causally integrated with the subsequent pullings of the triggers, the bullet that then goes and presumably kills the person being executed. Other examples. So does price fixing under antitrust laws. Raise your goddamn fares 20%, I'll raise mine the next morning, is not protected speech. It is attempted joint monopolization, a highly verbal crime. And then some other examples. In a court of law, if I am the head of a jury announcing the verdict, when I say not guilty, that's a performative, and certain actions necessarily and causally follow from that. In the context of a marriage ceremony, saying I do in that existential context is to make a commitment to a certain social and therefore legal relationship to, in my case, a woman. All right, so the distinction between speech and act is at a minimum not as clear-cut as some metaphysical justifications for the First Amendment and freedom of speech would have it, or we might argue more forcefully that there is a metaphysical continuity between speech and act, that they are both part of a causal process, and it's just an arbitrary distinction wherever it is that we want to draw the line. But she wants to argue then, in the context of the social circumstances within which pornography is created, predominantly women, and then she will go on to argue predominantly more powerless women, poorer women, women who have already been victimized by society and so forth. Pornography plays a role in maintaining that unequal, victimizing, oppressive regime. Social inequality is substantially created and enforced. That is done through words and images. So it's not that the words and images are just recording pre-existing social inequalities, and it's not also that there's just these words and images and they have no effect on the maintenance of the social inequality. It is complicit and built into the construction of the social inequality regime. What pornography does, it does in the real world, not only in the mind. In pornography, women are gang raped so they can be filmed. So on the production side, it is abuse. Right? It's not merely a recording of abuse, and the abuse is happening for the purpose of the recording. Similarly, on the consumption end, it is not the ideas in pornography that assault women. Men do. Men who are made, changed, and impelled by it. Now, pausing here, we will note again the earlier suggestion of a social constructionist understanding of language, of representation, of reality. The argument here is not that there is some sort of innate male sexuality. Maybe, but that's not what is being highlighted here. Men themselves are highly malleable, and they will themselves be constructed into a certain understanding of what it is to be a man, what it is to be masculine, how it is that one should relate to women sexually, and so forth. And so the argument then here explicitly is that the men themselves are also made by the pornography that they see, just as the women are constructed by the pornography that they see. Men who are made, changed, and impelled by it. And how does this social conditioning or this construction of masculinity as well as the femininity occur? And it's not that it's an intellectual cognitive process, the idea that human beings are rational beings, we can entertain ideas, shape our own character, shape our own emotions, direct our actions, and so forth. That understanding of human nature we will set to the side. This is not because they are persuaded by its ideas, or even inflamed by its emotions, or because it is so conceptually or emotionally compelling, but because they are sexually habituated to its kick, a process that is largely unconscious and works as primitive conditioning. The conscious mind relative to the unconscious mind. It's the unconscious mind that is more powerful and operative in these cases. It is not a matter of entertaining and decision. It is rather conditioning, and rather a primitive conditioning at that. So the pornography then is making, constructing, conditioning both girls into a female role and boys into a male role, and then even the adults are still subject to being made and remade depending on what they are exposed to. Pornography does not persuade people so much as change them. So there's a kind of environmental conditioning thesis here, or a social deterministic thesis at work here. Whether it is fully deterministic, that's not been made explicit, but something close to a social determinism at work. The idea that we have volition, that we are self-regulating, self-controlling, self-deciding, self-made as human beings. MacKinnon is rejecting that understanding of human beings. Now then, a strong claim. Sooner or later, in one way or another, the consumers want to live out the pornography further in 3 dimensions. Sooner or later, in one way or another, they do. It makes them want to. When they believe they can, when they feel they can get away with it, they do. Now, this does not presume that all pornography is made through abuse, right? Or rely on the fact that some pornography is made through coercion as a legal basis for restricting all of it. Empirically, the social context now within which pornography is made, right? All pornography is made under conditions of inequality based on sex. Pausing there for a moment. It is not a matter of liberty of the participants in the making of pornography. It is equality that is the operative concept here. And then what we find is that in the making of pornography, there are unequal, in many cases dramatically unequal social relationships of powerful and powerless. And that is the operative fact we should attend to. Pornography is made under conditions of inequality based on sex, overwhelmingly by poor, desperate, homeless, pimped women who were sexually abused as children. The industry's profits exploit and are an incentive to maintain these conditions. These conditions constrain choice rather than offering freedom. They are what it takes to make women do what is, even the pornography shows, no overt violence. So there is violence baked into the pornography, no matter how much it seems like everybody is a voluntary participant in the process. If you attend only to that apparent voluntary interaction, the woman says yes, or the woman signs the contract, or the woman even receives some money as payment, all of that veils or masks the underlying reality of inequality, and usually a violent inequality that this then new pornography is only going to reinforce. So, on the basis of this, we need a new and better definition of pornography. She mentions here Andrea Dworkin, another kind of feminist, a theorist who had a negative view of male-female relationships as a matter of principle, and so given the commonalities between Dworkin's analysis and MacKinnon's analysis, there are some differences, but nonetheless on fundamentals they share an approach that says pornography is not something that should be protected. It's not a matter of free speech. It's not a matter of, in the legal way, First Amendment rights, at least in the United States. Rather, pornography is a form of coercion. It's a form of violence based on a certain social constructionist and inegalitarian understanding of current society. Therefore, this is the new operative definition. Andrea Dworkin and I have proposed a law against pornography that defines it as graphic, sexually explicit materials that subordinate women through pictures or words. And then the argument is going to be that that is what should be censored. Now, a couple of interesting things here. One is that this is not the old conservative versus liberal, right, or traditionalist versus modern freedom of expression and freedom of consumption debate between pornography. The traditional conservative argument, of course, had been that human nature, right, by nature, is something dark, aggressive, sinful, nasty, and so what we need is to not give people too much freedom or too much liberty to do whatever they want, because what they want to do really are socially destructive things. And so government, as the leading institution of society, should set certain rules, including censorship of things that are too tempting, that unleash the beast, so to speak, in the interest of preserving social peace, social order, social decency, and so forth. It's not that traditional conservative argument, because there is no suggestion here from MacKinnon or from Dworkin that there is this original sinful or this inner beast that is just waiting to be unleashed with the appropriate trigger. Instead, the understanding of human nature is that there is this malleableness. There's not this fixed, dark human nature. Instead, the dark humans that are willing to do all of these sorts of things are created by society, by social conditions. And so it is a more tabula rasa understanding of human nature rather than an inbuilt, often destructive desires understanding of human nature. And so the liberals had argued against the conservatives that human beings have some autonomy. They can choose their ideas, they can train their emotions, they can train their habits, they can be self-regulated, they can be trusted with freedom. In many cases, modern liberals had a more benevolent or healthy understanding of sexuality, that it wasn't something that is always or only nasty, and that one should feel guilty about wanting to engage in it, that rather human beings were seen as a more benevolent, self-controlling type of entity. And if we have a free society, people can learn to develop and will learn to develop healthy sexual relationships, and pornography can be a pleasure enhancement in a healthy sex life, and so on. So it's not that position either. Instead, the argument here is that the people are not these self-regulating beings. Instead, they are socially constructed. It's not that give people liberty and they will work out mutually beneficial relationships. Instead, give people liberty and the powerful will rise, the powerless will decline, and then the powerful will use their position of social inequality further to reinforce those positions. So this is not a pre-modern conservative position. It's not a modern liberal position, using some potentially inflammatory labels here. This is a kind of postmodern feminist argument for the censorship of pornography. Andrea Dworkin has said it: pornography is the law for women. A nice double entendre, in effect saying that women are subject to pornography and made to be subject to pornography according to the law and by the law. And so we're then left with what we had at the beginning, a terrible predicament for girls, young women, and even mature women. Andrea Dworkin recognizes we are left at the end of intercourse with a violated child alone on the bed, this one wondering if she is lucky to be alive.